All right, welcome. This screencast, we're going to talk about how to create an infographic focusing on character selection, event selection, creating the biography, and then deciding what data you want to present on the infographic. And I'll show you an example of an infographic as we go as well. So the very first thing you got to do is you got to choose your character. So we gave you that sheet of 6 characters. For the purpose of this, I'm going to go ahead and show. I'm going to use Sally as an example. So we know that Sally was born in 1796 on Fairfield Plantation, South Carolina, African American woman, and that she died in 1844. So even though the sheet doesn't tell us this, we can assume that an African American woman born in 1796 on a plantation in South Carolina would, overwhelmingly likely have been enslaved. So we're going to use that as an assumption. All right, so from there, we can go ahead and start choosing what topics we want to look at. So we go back to this list that we shared with you of the different page numbers of where you'd find different topics. And we can start, like we look at the Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark. Well, that might make sense. So we can sort of keep that in mind. Indian Removal Act probably will not have a huge direct impact on her, though there would be some ways it could matter. There are some things we can simply eliminate right off the bat. For instance, her story will not likely be very affected by Mormons. The Battle of Little Bighorn will have very little to do with her. Same with Massacre at Wounded Knee. But there are some things that are going to fit in much more cleanly. So, for instance, the cotton gin. A plantation in South Carolina would overwhelmingly likely have been a cotton plantation. So that would be a part of her story, even if she was not using it herself. We can also use plantation slavery would be sort of a logical fit. You could do Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark. You could do Americans in Texas and Independence, Missouri Compromise of 1850, although 1850 was after she died, but Missouri Compromise would certainly fit. Manifest Destiny. There's a whole bunch of these that can fit. So what it comes down to is a question of picking which ones fit into the story you're trying to create. So for this story, I went with plantation slavery, cotton gin. I added in St. Louis just to do a little different twist on it, and then Texas. So I have these events. The next question is, what do you want to do with these events? What do you want your character to do? So for Sally, I decided that plantation slavery would fit in because she could live on plantations in various places. As a slave, she could be sold various places in different times. She could be forced to live in different plantations in different places. So I thought that she could live on plantations. I say could, she didn't have an option. I know that. But in terms of creating the biography, I could have her on a plantation in South Carolina, and then I could eventually have her sold to a plantation in Texas. Plus, just the idea of being sold is something that happens to men and women who are enslaved. Free people are not bought and sold. Then we have the cotton gin. Decided we could use that because those two plantations could be cotton plantations. So again, even if she's not turning the handle, even if she's not using the cotton gin, it would be something that would be a part of her life because it would be in use where she lived. The economy of the place where she was would be driven by the cotton gin. I could use St. Louis because St. Louis was in, I know this is a surprise, Missouri, which is a slave territory, a slave state. So that could be someplace where she could be moved to or sold. And then I could have her move into Texas, which would be where the other plantation is. So now it's simply a question of how do we write out the biography? So we know just by looking at this sheet here, or this list, she's going to live on plantations in South Carolina and Texas, and she'll be sold twice. She's going to live on 2 cotton plantations, so that would be one in South Carolina, one in Texas. Somewhere down the line, she'll be moved into St. Louis, and she'll be moved to Texas. So this is actually a pretty simple biography. So let's take a look at how I actually went about writing it. Okay. Sally was born in early spring 1796 at Fairfield Plantation in South Carolina, the 6th child of Harriet. So right there I've covered plantation slavery. I didn't get into a lot of detail about it. I didn't talk about how life was. I didn't talk about her house she grew up in. Didn't talk about the slave master or the other slave. This is simply a question of this is where she was born, and that's okay for the biography. Next, In 1804, Sally was sold to the Johnson family, moving west to Louisiana, who wanted a playmate for their daughter, Jenny. Honestly, this is probably more information than even needs to be included, but it's a nice, simple little detail that helps the story make some sense. The Johnsons claimed land just west of St. Louis and remained there. Sally got along with Jenny, and the family treated her well. Jenny was married in 1819 and moved away, and Sally, now 23, was not very valuable to the family. So we've covered St. Louis. Several months later, she was sold to a slave trader and was on a steamboat headed to New Orleans. This could have fit into plantation slavery because, again, slaves are sold, free people are not. Could cover steamboat, could cover Louisiana Purchase because New Orleans was a part of Louisiana Purchase. But for the sake of this, it's just more of a transition. There, she was sold to a rancher on his way to the Mexican province of Texas. Sally was forced to work in the cotton fields. In 1835, the rancher was killed during the war with Mexico, and his son inherited Sally. So those 3 sentences, we've covered Texas and the cotton gin, and, to some extent, plantation slavery. In 1844, Sally collapsed in the field from dehydration and was beaten to death at 48 years old. So there we're back to plantation slavery and sort of closing up the story. So that's how you can sort of take these events, turn them into pieces of a person's biography, then actually create the biography. The next step is to look at data presentation. What are you going to show? So for plantation slavery, we have living on plantations in South Carolina and Texas. So I thought one way to show that would be to show where were slaves in 1800, right? If we're going to be talking about plantation slavery around 1800, might as well show where plantations and where slaves were in 1800. Next thing for the cotton gin, I decided to create a diagram of a cotton gin because while we kind of know what a cotton gin does, it's not like we know how to use it. So it would be good information to add to show how that works. For St. Louis, even though we're all at least loosely familiar with St. Louis since we live there, we probably aren't all that aware of just how unbelievably fast St. Louis grew during the time. So maybe I could find or create a graph of St. Louis's growth. And then for Texas, I want to show a map of the United States expanding up to the point where we got Texas. So what we end up with here, and I know I'm skipping all the data acquisition steps and skipping all the parts where you actually create the charts, but we'll get to that another day. We end up with something that looks kind of like this. So this first part here is literally just dropping that biography directly in here. There's nothing additional, there's nothing different, just that. Then we've got slavery in 1800. So here's a map of where the different states were and states and territories at the time and how many slaves were in each area. And then for a description, Fairfield Plantation in South Carolina was one of a vast number of plantations spread across the South. This map shows the number of slaves in each state only a few years after she was born. So by showing that, I'm making a connection from Sally to slavery in 1800 by mentioning Fairfield Plantation where she was born, but I don't have to sort of pummel the reader over the head with it, right? It's there, that's enough. We get it. The point here is to show something about westward expansion. So the same thing with the cotton gin. The productivity of cotton plantations like Fairfield increased significantly after the widespread adoption of the cotton gin made it quicker and easier to separate seeds from saleable cotton. Yes, it's about Sally, it's about Fairfield Plantation, but really it's showing something bigger about westward expansion. The connection to Fairfield, the connection to Sally is really it's a gimmick almost. It's to make sure that we can it's a way to get to the information. Population of St. Louis. When Sally arrived in St. Louis with the Johnsons, it was a small town. By the time she was sold in 1819, it was on the rise, blah, blah, blah. It gets bigger and bigger. Here's a map, or not a map, here's a chart showing the population of St. Louis in the thousands. Again, the connection with Sally and the Johnsons is a way to get to what's going on in westward expansion. Finally, the annexation of Texas. Though Sally died before Texas was annexed officially to the United States in 1845, her time there was filled with tension and violence, blah, blah, blah. And then we've got, here's the land in 1776, 1783, 1819, 1803, which I did those in the wrong order, and 1845. And you can get a sense of, well, here's how Sally's story connects in with the bigger story. I'll be sharing all of this with you through Classroom. If you have any questions, please let me know. Hope this helped. Have a great day.